Like I said, this is our last. We're doing John 20 bit by bit, looking at all the different appearances to Mary, to Peter, to the disciples. And here we have the most famous of the lot, Doubting Thomas. Imagine going down in history as the doubter in the Bible. Not the best thing, but great help to us, isn't it? This passage makes us wrestle with what to do with our doubts and what is the place of doubt in the life of faith. How are we to handle them when they come upon us, which they always do. There are all kinds of doubts we might have about our faith. There's kind of intellectual doubts we can have about miracles and about the philosophy and the working of the Bible and how it's real in our day. But then there's kind of more personal doubts. Doubts about, say, the goodness of God because of the things we face in life, because of the suffering that comes upon us, the relationships that fall apart. Doubts about whether Christianity is a good way to live. Skeptical kind of post-secular doubts about whether Christianity is good news for our world yet or not, still or not, as our institutions demonstrate their failures. Intellectual, personal, and kind of post-secular doubts, they all come to us, let's be honest. What do we do with them? What do we make of them? You know, if you look at the story of any major Christian figure in the last 100 years, all of them wrestle with doubt. One of the most famous was actually Mother Teresa, interestingly enough. In her journals, many times, speaks about this kind of deep spiritual desolation she was experiencing. She said, "Darkness is such that I rarely do not see it. In my heart and my mind, God in my soul is blank. Such deep longing for God and yet nothing, no faith, no love, no zeal. And yet I keep smiling at him in spite of everything." So interesting that such a woman who did love God and love people so well, behind it, there was such a deep wrestle with faith and with the darkness of doubt. That's why I think this passage is such a gift to us. Let me tell you 3 things about Thomas that help us, I think. First thing is this. Thomas makes it very clear, doubt has its place. It has its rightful place in our stories and in our faith. Thomas's doubt, to be honest, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? It's very simple. Jesus has risen from the dead, and he appeared to all of the disciples, but for some reason, Thomas wasn't there. Out fishing, out doing an odd job, imagine not being there, missing it. But he also was the witness to Jesus' crucifixion, still dark in his mind. And he says, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." The Greek is very emphatic. It's a double negative, as strong as it can be. I will never, ever, ever believe, he says, unless I can touch the wounds. It makes sense, doesn't it? He wasn't there, but he wants empirical proof. It's too implausible that Jesus rose from the dead. It wasn't expected. It's not normal. It's unrealistic. He wants evidence. That's us, isn't it? Longing for evidence. Empirical proof of the things of God. Empirical proof that Jesus rose from the dead, that the miracles actually happened, that all of this is true in the end. Some scientific data to just nail it all down. Thomas longs for proof, and so do we. It's interesting because Thomas is in exactly the position that we are in. We don't see Jesus risen from the dead. We hear the testimonies of the apostles written here. That was Thomas's position as well. He didn't get to see. He had to believe based on the testimony of others. Difficult to understand, difficult to believe. That's what makes his story so important. This one like us who longed for the proof, who had to accept the testimony. We see his doubt overturned into faith. It's a gift to us. On the one hand, it affirms us. Yes, there's stuff to be doubted and questioned here. Things that need answers so belief can happen. Doubt is a part of faith. In the Acts reading we read, it talked about how Jesus presented himself to them, the disciples, and gave many convincing proofs that he was alive. I love that sentence because it just says what happened with Thomas happened again and again and again and again and again over 40 days. Convincing proofs without number. People who examined and tested the body of Jesus and found it to be true. These examples are promises to us that there was proof, while at the same time affirming that it's okay to have the questions. The Bible makes ample room for the reality that it is hard to believe. But the second thing we see here is that the answer to our doubts, or the answer to Thomas's doubt, was not actually the evidence. The answer to Thomas's doubt was the living Jesus. You see what happened? A week later, Jesus left him a whole week. A whole week. Think about that. He could have appeared to him right then and there. Gave him a whole week to mull it over. A week later, his disciples were in the house again. Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, which means they were still terrified. Which means it's really a room full of people who don't quite believe yet, even the ones who've seen him, still terrified of what's happening. Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he offers himself to Thomas. Put your finger here, put your hand here, reach out your hand, put it in my side, stop doubting and believe. Notice what Thomas doesn't do. He doesn't put his fingers there, doesn't put his hand out. It's not recorded that he does. Think very strategically. It wasn't the exact empirical things that actually mattered to Thomas. Thomas's questions are overcome with the fact that the real living Jesus is in front of him in all his glory and power and goodness and love. I find this beautiful and interesting for a number of reasons. First is that Jesus knew his doubt and came and talked to him about it. How good is that? How good is that? You have doubts, I have doubts. Jesus wants to talk about them with us. He's not afraid of them. He's not scared of them. He's not worried about them. He wants to interact with us about them. And yet maybe the answer to our doubts is different than what we expected. Sometimes our longing for empirical proofs isn't actually the thing we need most. Particularly for those doubts which are really personal, about the things that have happened in our lives or the things happening in our world. What we need is not empirical proof, but we need a demonstration that God is good, that God is still powerful, that God is still gentle and loving and with us. These proofs can't be empirically given. They're given by the present and real Jesus Christ, by our knowledge and love of him, by him showing himself to us in who he is, in our fear and our doubt and our confusion. The doubts are answered by the presence of Jesus. I think it's the same for us. In the beginning of the Acts reading, again, beautiful the way it's written. It says, "In my former book, I wrote about all that Jesus began to do and teach." Began to do and teach until the day he was taken up to heaven. Which is to say, after Jesus went up to heaven, what does he keep doing? He keeps doing and teaching things. That the gospel is just the beginning, but the real and living Jesus is still active, meeting disciples in their doubt, coming to show his fullness of glory and love to us, as is shown to Thomas here. Ready and waiting for us to come to him with our questions, that he might answer them with his power and his love and his goodness. This is why when we doubt, it's so important where we go with those doubts. God wants us to doubt in his presence, before him, to lay it out, and to ask him to show us more of Jesus, to show us more of him. It's our personal interaction and love and relationship with him, our sureness of it, that actually gives us confidence in the face of the things we doubt. So Thomas demonstrates that it's okay to doubt. He demonstrates how Jesus comes to us and meets us with his living presence in our doubts. But the third thing, this is the beautiful part of this passage. Not many times this happens in John, but Jesus starts talking directly to us. Did you notice it? And he says to us, it is blessed to believe without seeing. It's blessed to believe without seeing. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. Then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you've believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. That sentence, Jesus is talking to you. It's a sentence for you. It's not for the disciples. They're all seeing and believing. That sentence is for us who don't get to see as they saw, who have to depend upon their testimony as it comes to us. Blessed are you when you trust the testimony without believing, without seeing. John goes on to explain why. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples. At the end of the next chapter, he says, if all of them were written down, not even the whole world would have room for the books that were written, which I love. That's how the gospel ends. So many things that Jesus did, but he says, we wrote these ones down so that you'd know that Jesus is the Messiah and have life in his name. John's saying, we're just giving you a sample. We've just given you enough to know that Jesus is who he says he is, that he is God's Messiah, and that by believing you may have life in his name. You see, what the Gospels ask of us is not to have everything squared away perfectly, not to have all our intellectual and philosophical doubts nailed, not to feel wholly confident with everything that's happening in life, that we have it under control or we have a perfect system of thinking. What John is asking us in the Gospel is to trust that Jesus is who he says he is and can give life. That on the basis of the things recorded, that there's enough to trust who he is in himself, without squaring away everything else around us. And Jesus says it's blessed to be in that position, believing who he is in and through the midst of our doubts. Anne Lamont, who is an American novelist, teacher, she speaks a lot as well. She says this about her faith and her doubts. My coming to faith did not start with a leap, but rather a series of staggers from what seemed like one safe place to another. Like lily pads, round and green. These places summoned, then held me up while I grew. Each prepared me for the next leaf on which I would land. And this way I moved across the swamp of doubt and fear. I love this picture of just being on a lily pad and going, okay, I'm here. I'm safe. This is okay. I'm going to take a step onto the next lily pad and then onto the next lily pad. This picture of being in a swamp of doubt and fear. But just going, I can trust Jesus now with this. I'm okay. He's God. He's raised from the dead. He loves me. I'm okay. And maybe after a little bit, moving on to the next leap. And bit by bit, staggering our way through. Not with all the doubts and fears gone, but with just enough confidence in each point in who Jesus is. And maybe bit by bit having that grow and deepen and develop. You see, that's what our doubts offer us. They offer us opportunities to grow our confidence, not diminish it. To deepen our sense of God's love and power rather than to let it grow dull. Our doubts offer us a way onto the next lily pad, onto the next step of our faith, and onto its continual evolution and development as we love and know our God more and more in and through our doubts, until the day when our faith will become sight. So friends, do not worry about your doubts. It's okay. But bring them to the Lord. Let him hold and help you with them. And know that in the end, all you need is actually just him, rather than all the answers to all the things that your heart is perplexed by.